Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Coll, your faithful dean.
Hey, good.
I am
I think we have, yes.
really glad to see you here and glad that you came out.
Thank you.
A couple of housekeeping notes, and then we'll get started. We are on the record. We are live streaming. And as everybody knows, when I come to a big public event, what I want to know first is what's the hashtag, and that is Morning Joe at CJS today. So tweet away. And
don't you all want to wish your dean a happy birthday?
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Hashtag happy birthday, Dean.
Happy birthday.
No, none
So-
of that.
no, no.
None of that.
No, 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 no.
Okay,
Marilyn, none
never
of
mind,
that.
never mind.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we'll start, and we'll talk for about up here for 25 minutes or so. At the top of the hour, we'll turn it over to you. Just remember you're live streaming, so frame your language as your mother watching at home will want to hear you speak.
Joe.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I wanted to start maybe by talking a little bit about the art of your show, because it is a rare rolling public discussion. It takes on a lot of serious public policy matters and stays away from a lot of trivia that's on other morning shows, and yet it does it in a very loose way, I guess I would say. And I wonder, there's a lot of people here thinking about their own futures on live television. How much do you prepare? How much do you let it roll? What is your, do each of you do it the same way? Do you have different approaches?
Well,
take that first? Yeah.
I'd say the difference between us is an hour of hair and makeup, but
It takes me forever to get
I
this.
know.
It really does. You can
okay,
tell, right?
That's funny. Has anyone here seen our show? Just so I can figure out how much back. Oh, wow.
It's up
Okay,
to you,
great.
yeah.
So obviously, we fly by the seat of our pants most of the time, but we're preparing all the time at the same time, if that makes any sense. And we found early on that over-preparing was actually bad for our show, because a lot of the things that would come our way would happen 24 hours a day, and they'd happen within the news cycle of our show, the 3-hour window that we were on the air, especially covering campaigns where press releases are flying, and our instantaneous reaction, fresh reaction, organic reaction was much better than sitting there and thinking about what you're going to say. I would not urge you to try this at home. I've been around for 25 years in the television news industry, and Joe's been in politics and news. So I think that reaction comes with years of preparation.
Well, it really does. And people do ask that question all the time. How long, you've got a 3-hour show, how long does it take you to prepare? There are hosts for TV shows that will sit with a stack of papers in front of them and study those papers, and then they'll go on the air and they'll have everything typed into the teleprompter. We just don't do that. I mean, by the time I pick up the New York Times in the morning, so I was saying to the dean, I'm only trying to figure out where the placement of the actual stories are that I've read over the past 24 hours, because, I get all of my news here, and I get all of my breaking news alerts here. So, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Barack Obama holds a press conference, and I see that he's now actually talking about giving a little bit on the debt limit, which pains Mika a great deal. But we actually decided early on that we weren't going to be like the other shows. And you were talking about how we talk about Syria for 2 hours when Syria's the hot topic, and we somehow managed to avoid talking about twerking and Miley Cyrus. And, several years ago at the beginning, Mika ripped up, shredded, and burned Paris Hilton's stories while we were goading her on. But we found actually that as long as we knew everything that was in the paper, the less preparation, the better, especially on video, where we wouldn't watch the 30-second commercials during campaigns. We did at the beginning, and it sort of drained out the spontaneity. But it's great on air when you see a commercial, you go, wow.
Yeah, a campaign
that really
commercial.
Sucks.
Right.
I can't believe
Or I
they even
got
thought.
that.
Or, wow, that was really a moving commercial. Like, for instance, when de Blasio had his 30-second commercial with his son that really broke through, we just all stopped at the same time and went, wow.
You saw
win.
that for the first time live
We
on
saw
air?
that for the first time live because the campaigns will always send it to us. And how much better was it for all of us around the table to look at the commercial and go, wow,
Then-
that was really good.
And having said that, there is a place for twerking in our conversation because we actually bumped in cold open with that twerking from the night before, and I hadn't seen it, and I went crazy because I just thought it was the worst thing I've ever seen.
She's still going crazy. She's got two
I am.
teenage
What's
daughters
going on
who,
there? Well, I
like,
think that-
Mommy, why is Hannah Montana sticking her...
But I actually think that's a real conversation. So it's not that we're above talking about twerking, but it's going to be part of the way we frame things.
So what is the space that you occupy in the morning? I mean, nobody has been able to own that space and make it sustainable because the network shows have had to push toward ratings,
Right.
fluff, and then CNN and others who have tried it haven't been able to sustain a conversation or a sense of
And
place.
then they
I mean,
pull away from it. They go
Yeah.
halfway in, and then the ratings don't reward them immediately.
Right.
And then they start doing news you can use type garbage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just talking about all of the morning shows and
Mm-hmm.
the networks. If you're going to go all in on hard news, you've got to go all in on hard news.
And we actually had an interesting window of time to do what we wanted to do. You should maybe tell the story of how the show began and how you pitched it, and why we had that window of time when no one was looking in management to play this out a little bit.
Well, Don Imus, who we replaced, made the mistake of talking about women's basketball and got himself in a lot of trouble, got kicked off, and suddenly, our network had 3 hours to fill in the morning, and nobody could really talk for 3 hours. But you will see if at about 10:30, I can keep talking nonstop. So they figured out pretty quickly we could fill the 3 hours, and they really didn't expect anything from us. And then suddenly, so that gave us about 3, 4, 5
and
months.
you were on in prime time at that time.
I was on in prime
So what was
time.
the difference between what you wanted to do in prime time and what you wanted to do
it's a
with
nightmare.
Mika?
3 hours.
So, yeah. The difference is in prime time, I found out very quickly that people are sitting looking at the TV like this in prime time. And they're switching. Like the minutes are volatile. They go up and down and up and down. In the morning, people turn on the TV, they get ready, they feed their family, they get their kids ready for school or they get ready for work. And you can have a 15-minute conversation on Syria, and then you can have a 15-minute discussion on quantitative easing, so long as the economic nerds don't say quantitative easing too many times.
Even when they do.
People will sit there and they will stay there. But I've got to say, though, as you know, so much of it is in presentation. We've got to keep it moving. We've got to keep the pace going. And if somebody gets too bogged down in details, we've got to move the conversation on.
So what is the role of, I ask, as I think I've been on 3 times, but what is, for my instruction and also for a sense of how the show lives on the screen, what is the role of the guest in your mind? What is it that you want guests to do? Why do you have Richard Haas on and other people like me who are fairly, boring in the way that they...
We find that boring really sells.
sells.
And we're
You-
excited. Let me tell you.
Are a hot commodity.
Let me tell you a story. So the first year we did this, 2007, I was going through the airport, and this is our test. If we're fascinated by it, it rates. And so I was going through the airport. This was 2007. Walter Isaacson had just put out his Einstein book. I'm walking through the Atlanta airport. I grab it. I look at it. Oh, this is fascinating. So Einstein was, is more of a visual genius than anything. He put it in, how fascinating. And so I called my EP and I said, hey, Chris, let's get Walter Isaacson. He goes, no. I said, wait, no, it's on Einstein. I said, you're talking about like physics and like a 1903 theory. No. I said, get him on. So he called me back. He said, I'm so sorry, Joe. Walter can only do it over the phone because he hates waking up early. I go,
So that's lying on his back in bed on
Yeah,
his cell phone.
that's right.
Think about that.
So Walter was doing this. Well, Albert Einstein, he actually visualized his physics theories. And I'm sitting there listening, and I'm actually fascinated by this because I'm a loser. And we get to the end of the first 15-minute segment, and Chris is going, got him, a break, got a break. I go, hey, Walter, hold on a second. And you go, yes. I said, can you stick around for another segment? And Chris yelled, no, swear to God. That was our highest rated half hour in 2007. And so we, leading up to the Iowa caucuses in 2008, everything else. And that's when we figured out if it's interesting to us, then it's interesting, So you are a dinner guest and you come on, whether it's talking about the bin Ladens or whether it's talking about a new article. And please, buy this for a stocking stuffer this year. Now on paperback. And if we're fascinated by it, then you're the one that actually drives the whole conversation. And people at home, I am so blown away by how people will hear you tomorrow and come up to me in an airport 6 months from now and talk about, hey, I saw you, and it's pretty crazy.
What do you do if a guest is like dying, failing, flailing? What's your technique?
There was one today. I actually visibly wrap them. And I say, come to me, come on. And they kind of get confused and stop talking. I say, thank you very much coming up. But, there's two different things. There's, remember the one who didn't know he was off the air because he was just talking and talking and talking and talking, and we could not get him to stop.
That was
We won't
actually-
say his name. We'll call him John Smith.
God rest his soul. He worked for JFK, and he kept talking.
Live Twitter, live stream.
I know. And we finally said,
Hashtag
we went to break, and
be
then
quiet.
he kept talking, and I finally said,
It's John Smith.
so it's John Smith. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
In the break.
But here's a great thing. This is when I knew we were going to have a successful show, is when one guest after another, not just the old and infirm, but one guest after another would say, are we on there right now? Are we on there?
Right.
Because the way the show started, Don Imus, you remember Don Imus, but maybe most of these people out here don't. Don Imus had his shtick, and everybody tried to do the shtick, and they tried to be Don Imus, and we went on. We were just talking around the table. We were in the middle of the conversation. This was on the first show. And they were counting us down, 5, 4, 3. And we just kept talking. And I said to everybody, just keep talking. The camera came on, and we just kept going in our conversation. And, I looked up, I go, oh, hey, welcome to the show. And then we went back to the conversation, making the point that we weren't going to play TV. And when people come on the show for the first time, they always say, what do I do? What do I do? I love the show. What do I do? And Mika always says, don't play TV.
Right.
And I think that's the key,
And
right,
Mika, when you're on the air, you are often referring to social media, or you seem to be reading and
God.
Well,
So is that like anchor shuffling papers, or is that a real thing that you do? I mean, what is
Joe gets
the-
very insulted.
I get mad.
Anchor shuffling papers. Oh, shoot me in the heart.
Well, we always love that. You just
Yeah,
go, we'll be
important
right back.
shuffle.
And then, is it off yet? Is it off? Mika, explain to these people,
Yes.
why do you insist on looking at your mentions on Twitter in the morning when they are all hateful?
You annoying
To both of
libtard.
us. You would not believe what they say
You
about
would
it.
no, seriously. You would. It's because now I find like they top themselves every day.
Yeah.
With the words they make up to try and bring me down. I do like to watch. Like today, we had a segment. Actually, it was a really interesting segment with one of our hosts on the network, and it was kind of dicey. And I noticed on Twitter that every point of view came up, like again and again and again and again and again. And I guess, in the world of journalism, sometimes when both sides are calling you saying they hated the story, you've done a good job. It was a Twitter version of that. So sometimes I watch reaction, and sometimes the vitriol. It's just interesting.
What is the nature of the criticism that's out there? Are people rating? Are they just basically haters of you, or are they rating
It's
what's on the
everything.
story? What's on the show at any given
I'll
moment?
show you tomorrow.
A lot of it.
Okay.
A lot of it is pure hatred, but occasionally somebody, and this is why we do look at it, occasionally somebody will say, you said such and such was first elected in 2002. Actually, he was elected in a special election in 2003. And you can really correct.
And they'll send you the article.
And they'll send you an article. And you can correct in real time. And I'm not joking when I say this. Unfortunately, these days, especially when you're talking about Syria, or you're talking about a government shutdown, or you're talking about these really big political events, the haters really come out in full force. And I just want to offer one warning. You just can't be swayed by that. Because Ezra Klein wrote this article before this blog, and he was talking actually about Sharknado, that it was huge on Twitter but really didn't rate that well. I can tell you know what? We did segments today where Al Sharpton came on. Willie basically asked if he was sorry about Tawana Brawley. He bungled it, in my opinion. Al's a friend of mine. He didn't handle it well. I didn't go on Twitter afterwards because I knew people were going to be crazy. Then we had Matt Lewis come on. Matt's a good friend of mine, very conservative guy, talking about why evangelicals were moving away from the Republican Party, some younger evangelicals. We talked about Matthew 25. I mean, we go from one end zone to the other. And if I were sitting there on Twitter worrying about what people were saying, then I wouldn't speak my mind. Now, I will go on afterwards, but I'm not as hooked to, like Mika Mika likes the abuse. About once a week, I say, turn that off. Stop that.
Yeah.
Don't look.
Oh, my
because
hair
it
looks
is.
so bad.
Oh my God. And can I tell him the one that just finished you?
What was the best one?
No, this is the worst one. So Mika's written this book called Obsessed. It's saying, women, embrace your body. Don't try to be too skinny. Mika was like 100 and, she was like a pretzel. I mean, a stick pretzel. She's like 108.
Please, live streaming.
And so she wrote this book, and she decided that she was going to pick up 15 pounds, right? So she gets up to 135, and she's basically, I'm proud of myself. I am woman. Hear me roar. And then somebody tweeted in, congratulations. It looks like you're pregnant.
Oh, right. There was that.
She was no good for the rest of the show, Steve.
Okay. Well, that was one
horrible.
specific day.
Actually, I want to ask Mika about her books because they're really about career and important in that way. But before we go there, what is the relationship between the way you speak out in public now when you're on television and the way you did when you were an elected member of the House of Representatives?
That's a great question.
I think when I was an elected member, I was a Republican first. And so I think it was more, I was a little more calculated in exactly what I said. I was still an independent. They still thought I was a quirky guy and couldn't quite figure me out. But now, the past couple of weeks, I've been very, very critical of Ted Cruz. Been very, very critical of the House Republicans who I think I won't say are holding America hostage or anything like that, but they are acting in a way that I think undermines our system in Washington right now. And then I attack people that don't turn off cell phones in the middle of important speeches. But then on the other side, I'm also critical at the same time of Barack Obama. And talk about how this is 5 years of not reaching out to the Republican side. And yes, the Republicans are trying to knock his head off, but guess what? They tried to do the same thing to FDR. They tried to do the same thing to JFK, to LBJ. So,
But you're a former, so when you see an elected politician come on and read out talking points to you,
Oh, he can smell it a mile away.
what is your
We cut him
standard
off
technique?
Stop with your talking points.
We cut him off, and Mika is especially good at saying, stop the talking points. You're not, and if they continue the talking points.
Thank you very much. Coming up next.
It does help having somebody like Mika that was hanging out around the White House when she was 9 years old and grew up in Washington, or me at 29 starting to campaign for Congress, right? Being able to snip
Well, we
it
just
out.
bring lots of different not just points of view, but experiences to the table. We're very transparent about them.
Right.
And I think it really helps.
So I do want to ask Mika a little bit about her life and career. I wonder, growing up at the White House at 9 years old, how many people here know who Mika Brzezinski's father was?
That's
That's
pretty good.
All right,
good.
excellent.
That's pretty
So
good.
Big New Brzezinski was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, remains one of the
Taught
most...
here for 29 years at not
Taught at
Columbia
Columbia,
Journalism.
29 years.
Yeah.
Is that right? And still a very influential foreign policy thinker and writer. But you've written 2 books essentially about phases of your career, about women and work-life balance in journalism and in broadcasting. I'm sure it's difficult to distill the complex kind of stories and ideas that you have put down in 2 different volumes. But, thinking of a class of students, median or average age, 26, 27, obviously people have chosen a life in journalism. It's a demanding
Very.
schedule, no matter whether you're on air or not. What do you feel like are the 2 or 3 lessons that you still rely on?
Well, some of them I've learned just recently and finally. And I hope that some of the women in the audience don't take as long as I did. And it really had to do with negotiating my own salary and ultimately with any relationship you have with anyone. And, bottom line is self-respect, but how you actually carry that out in the way you communicate. And I think, especially in journalism, no matter what medium you go into, you're going to have to learn to communicate effectively. You're going to have to learn how to talk on camera. Even if you're in print, you're going to end up on television. If you have a big story, you're going to be doing it all. Learn now, stand up in church, stand up in class, stand up at dinner, make speeches, make toasts, do whatever you can do to learn what it feels like on the outside to communicate effectively and make mistakes while you're really young. And as it pertains to negotiating or any relationship, you got to walk into it as, look, I think you're not going to be like the guys, but you can't bring with you some of the common characteristics that women before you have, which is such a deep sense of appreciation to be at the table at all that you're just so grateful that you'll take anything at any cost, because you have a lot of decisions to make on many levels in your life, and you're going to have to learn to prioritize and be clear. And also, you shouldn't be worried about being friends with everybody in the room when you're negotiating anything, whether it be a relationship or a contract, because that's what girls do. We want everyone to feel comfortable. You're not there to be friends, you're there to work, just like the guys. And then you can really have a conversation and reach your goals in that conversation. And I find that women, at least especially in my generation and the one before me and then yours, which is less of a problem, I think you guys are far better off starting out than when I was, or women in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. But we tend to apologize our way into conversations. Yeah, nodding. How many people have said, I'm sorry today? Just think about the word. Exactly, all the girls. I'm sorry, this is a bad time, Professor. I'm sorry, Dean Coll, but could I? No, you're not sorry, so don't lie. And don't back your way into a conversation like that, because you're basically saying, don't give me what I'm asking for. You're not, have to find different words. And the message of that is so much stronger than just the words itself in terms of the way you conduct yourself and the words you find. And then in terms of life balance, I will just say one thing, and it's what I tell all young women. And that is that if you want to have a career, that's fantastic, and you should go for it on every level and work hard and do everything you need to do. But if you want to have a family as well, you work as hard on that. Finding a life partner is really hard. Having kids is really hard, and there's no good time. And it's just as hard as a career. And if you want it, you're going to have to work hard for it and make a lot of sacrifices. And I wouldn't forget to do that along the way, because everything's kind of empty if you miss that goal. And if it's a goal you have.
And you say don't put it off.
I wouldn't. It's not the kind of thing you can just turn a switch on and make children appear. It's much more complicated than that.
Is it really?
Well, in your case. They just appear.
I got 4 of them.
Yeah.
I don't know where they come from.
Honestly, that last one. So anyhow, but no,
Well,
it's...
that's it's really very moving to hear you speak. So Let me ask something about the professional equation. You've achieved presumably something even beyond what you'd hoped for when you started out, in the sense that you own your own space on the air now. You have your own kind of show, your own personality. You've got a lot of room to be yourself on air, and so presumably that's something you feel grateful for and proud of. But it was a long time coming.
Yeah.
And I wonder what are the prospects for women on the air these days? I mean, where would you advise women to develop their talent? What is it that is really the key?
Lewis.
Come up real quick.
Yeah.
Lewis.
I know this is kind of a strange way to answer that question because Lewis is
Okay,
not a
Lou,
woman.
could you come up here? So Lewis works for us.
Yeah.
We call him Pretty Boy Lou.
Yeah, he's pretty.
Only because of his delicate bone structure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at his
Like a
hands.
bird.
It's like the bone structure of a bird.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Okay, so Lewis does everything. And actually, I think this will apply to men and women. Getting into this business isn't like it used to be. You're not going to carry a huge camera around in Dubuque, Iowa, or Presque Isle, Maine, which would not hire me, and I'm still sore. Seriously, the smallest market in the country said I needed more experience. But that's okay. And you're going to do what Lewis does. And he's the future. And by the time Lewis is done doing it, it'll be even more disparate and dispersed because he shoots, he edits, he reports, he gets coffee, he screws that up.
terrible.
He is a producer, a planner, an editor, a manager. How old are you, Lewis? 27. And he's 27.
So, but Phil Griffin, who's the president of
He's
MSNBC,
27.
says that Lewis is the future, and the reason why is because Lewis does everything. He goes out, he does with that camera, he films, he interviews, and then he edits it, and then he tracks it, and then he puts it up himself.
He works on his voice. He works on his on-camera presentation. But he produces everything. We have a promo coming out, which has a budget of how much? $20,000. And that promo is going to probably trump any promo MSNBC has put on the air.
Yeah, and people have looked at
Where
it.
they spend
It should
$200?
look like it's $250,000. But Lewis has figured out how to do this, and whether you're talking about women or men, it's very interesting.
It's the
Mika and
same.
I have a different bit of advice. My advice is learn how to write a sentence, and I think that's just because all the things I've been in. I published a paper, I was in Congress, I started this show, and at least the night show depended on scripts, and I was so frustrated that I would call people in and say, listen, I'm not asking you to write a novel.
Yeah.
I'm not even asking for a paragraph. Just write a clean sentence. I was distraught that I was constantly having. Mika, though,
I say that's just the beginning.
she says that's the beginning.
Because if you
Mika-
can't talk about it, and if you can't communicate it effectively and talk about it on your iPhone and send it in and shoot video at the same time and get your facts right, I mean, if you can't do it all, it's not going to happen for you. Because there used to be 5 people that would do what Lewis does. At least 5 people, and then it
least.
would go to a manager to approve. And those are,
No, you can't get a raise.
no, absolutely not. Know
Go
your
back
value.
to the back of the room. Know your value. Give me
and-
some coffee.
And those 5 people were layers of protection that you won't have.
Yeah.
And it is amazing how one fact can bring you down and how many layers of protection don't exist anymore, which I think is a sad testimony to what has happened to all levels of journalism, especially investigative reporting, which is not appreciated, especially on the local level where it's needed. But in any part of what you do, I mean, Lewis does the red carpet, then he'll do a story on wounded soldiers, and you can't get your facts wrong, and there's no layers of protection.
So it's a few minutes after 6. Why don't we ask the students to join in and ask some questions? I would assume that a bunch of journalism students would ask questions, so I'm waiting for the hands to shoot into the air, or actually there's a microphone
Love
there,
it.
so maybe the thing to do would be to go line up in front of the microphone, so if someone is watching on streaming, they could do that. So if you wouldn't mind, just go stand, he's right in the aisle. You can stand behind him and
Sorry,
ask
I
the
cut
second
you off.
question. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Matt Coletta. Thank you guys so much for coming today. I wanted to figure out what role the people sort of that aren't at the table play in putting your show together, and then when everything falls apart, when news happens, and then sort of what is the difference between somebody who's like really good and somebody who like you're not gonna ever let leave you.
Well, you're talking about Lewis again. There's really no one. No, we actually have a really small staff compared to all other. You've been looking more closely at this. It's fascinating.
We
though.
basically have 15 people working on our staff. CNN has 100. Fox and Friends, I have no idea how many.
CNN has 100 for the morning?
For the morning show,
morning
we've
show.
got 15.
Wow.
And the remarkable thing is, it's exciting. It's like a campaign. You know, everybody helps everybody.
Really young people.
I think we've had one person in 6.5 years utter the words, "That's not my job." They were gone in like 3 days. Because it is. They go through the night. But we have 15 people.
What's your cycle? When does it start?
It starts, it starts right after, we're off the show at 9. We come in, and then our senior producer, Jesse, says, okay, so what are we looking at for tomorrow? What are you anticipating? What
That
kind of
changes
guests would
all
you
day
like? And we know that we at least have, we work on the 2 or 3 people that we're going to have around the table, and then we start filling in the guests. And then by 2 or 3 in the afternoon, we start getting a better idea of the news that we're going to be talking about the next day.
And sometimes we're switching people out at 9 at night.
And he'll send out, like last night, he sent out the list at 7:30 or 8. Mika called me up, said, I think top of 6 is a little weak. We need to shuffle it around. So we called. He shuffles it around. And then usually we find from midnight to 5, a lot of news doesn't break. Sometimes it does overseas. But that's usually when our people are in putting the show together, from midnight to 5:30. And it's usually pretty set. So they've got a good bit of time to produce it out and
Write it.
Have fun
Yeah.
with it.
yeah.
Right, transition. Great.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Television industry across the world is going through some major changes, including in India, where I'm from. When I hear veterans like you, inspiring young journalists like us to be a one-man shop, I find it really depressing because sometimes I think that the quality of journalism suffers. I'm wondering, what are your views on that? I mean, if you're expected to pull out our iPhones, do shoddy editing, and shoot everything, don't we compromise on the quality?
Yes. Yes,
I
that's
think-
the reality.
I think maybe the quality is compromised on the editorial side as far as having layers of people helping you develop the story. But I've got to say, the technology that you all were born into, and the editing that you can do on a MacBook is, I'm a musician. I used to, a 16-track, recording machine was like, it's massive. Now it's, you can do it on a
It
laptop.
is amazing, but the bottom line is it's so frenetic. It's 24 hours, it's every second, and the race to get the story has broken the sound barrier. And that definitely has led to problems along the way. You see it all the time.
Well, but speaking from the Stone Age in newspapers, I mean, there was always the reality that you were alone with your facts. If you didn't,
That's right.
if you didn't self-fact check or self-regulate, it didn't matter whether you had 7 hours or 7 minutes. You were still going to hurt yourself by making mistakes, avoidable mistakes. And the thing there's no question that things are faster, but even as they've gotten faster, you can still ask yourself whether you would rather be right or first, because it is sometimes a
And there was a
choice.
news network that during Boston really screwed up.
Yep.
And I think they self-corrected.
I think that pressure, though, is what you're talking
Yep.
about, and
Yep,
it's
absolutely.
a reality.
Hey guys, a lot on the internet now has been this critique of false equivalence, right? That there's a danger to neutrality, especially given the news about the shutdown.
Right.
I was wondering what you guys' thoughts on that, and as far as if anything can be changed in terms of journalistic norms that journalists practice.
Well, I'm always being accused on Twitter of false equivalency because both sides, the ideologues on both sides think that all the truth rests with their side. I mean, I believed that in 1994 when I got elected to Congress. It was the first time Republicans controlled the House in a generation, and I said, now, finally, we're going to have clean government. About 3 months later, I said, uh-oh. You know, I mean, it's on both sides. And a lot of people don't want to hear that. You know what? Barack Obama is in part responsible for what's going on in Washington, D.C. It's his town. He never has really reached out even to Democrats on his own side. You know what? So he owns part of the problem. Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Marco Rubio, and other people that concocted a shutdown strategy are doing things that are going to damage the Republican Party, damage the conservative movement, damage our economy, and damage our political system. I just said some things that probably have upset people on both sides of the aisle. I'm sorry, there are no saints that I've seen in Washington, D.C. And so if you want to call that false equivalence, not you, but if people that are watching this live streaming want to call that false equivalence, that's fine. They're ideologues, in my opinion. The fact is that I've been in Washington long enough to know, just like Steve, you have, just like Mika, you have too, to know that all the virtue is not on one side and all the vice is not on the other side.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We get a lot of Ted Cruz fans that I angered here. You can tell. They're gonna
look
kick storm out.
enraged.
They storm to the microphone and say, "How dare you, sir!"
Promise I'm not with Cruz.
That's a Texas accent, though, right? Okay.
As a British national, I'd say one of the biggest differences between our mainstream TV news and America's is the use of political opinion, and not just from the pundits and the guests, but also the presenters,
Right.
whether that's criticizing people on one side, the other side, or indeed both sides. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit about sort of whether you believe that America does it better than other countries in that respect, or whether you think that there is merit in greater neutrality in TV news, although...
Right.
So do you mean that there's more or less of it on British, on Newsnight, for example?
Well, if you ask Rupert Murdoch this week, he's just massively criticised the BBC for a left-wing bias this week on Twitter. But putting aside Rupert Murdoch's comments, I think many certainly would argue that the BBC tries to tackle the day's news in maybe more of a less politically swayed...
Objective.
I've got to say, honestly, as a conservative, when I watch the BBC, and I watch them a lot, certainly at times I think there is a great bias there, even though they're trying to present the news as they see it, straight down the middle. It's kind of like Dan Rather saying, you know, back in the 1990s famously, that he thought the New York Times was a middle-of-the-road newspaper. I read the New York Times every day. I've read it every day since I was like 7 years old. It is a liberal newspaper for a liberal town, and I'm just fine with that. Mika, though, has great insights. By the way, Mika and I are both deeply offended, and we're live streaming, I shouldn't say this. I will just say, certain cable news networks that are so ideological
Live
in
streaming.
prime time. I know. I'm just saying, certainly nobody that we work for, I'm sure. But we're very discouraged by a lot of what we see in news. But Mika, I love what you say about, you know, your experience at ABC and CBS and NBC about not false equivalency, but this sort of false sense of objectivity.
Yeah, and you know, to what you just said about some of the programming out there that is leans one way or another, I will say that on our show, we've tried to build something different, and that is very transparent about our ideologies, very transparent about our worldview, very transparent about our background, very transparent about the types of homes we grew up in, to help the viewer understand the point of view from which we are speaking. And we do that with everybody who comes on the show. And I actually think there is room for more of that. And when I think about my years working at CBS, ABC, and NBC as a network correspondent, I think about what objective really means. I truly believe that everybody I worked with went to work every day with the full intention of putting together a piece looking at both sides of the story and being as truly objective as they can. But how possible is that if everybody who is creating that, putting together that newscast, went to Harvard and grew up in a similar community or the same community, and their kids go to the same schools? I don't know.
And you say they're all liberal, too.
Well,
most of them.
There was that, and also like what I found fascinating is that they would steal from the front page of the New York Times often, like or any of the front pages within the paper. Sometimes the network newscasts, I mean, this is a national network newscast, would have the same happy kicker that all the others would. I mean, that's people thinking the same way. So I urge everybody in my business to really think about that. And when you're being, quote, objective, are you really? And why do you have to hide your ideology? Why do you have to hide who you voted for? Why do you have to hide your own personal sense of opinion? I'm not sure that's necessarily a good thing, because I'm not sure it's possible to be objective.
Why is MSNBC the right network for your show?
That's such a
Well,
good
it was
question.
just an accident, actually. I'm actually more comfortable working at a network like MSNBC than, say, a conservative network, only because I get to play devil's advocate.
He loves to be challenged. I mean, surround him with 5 libs, and that's a good morning for him.
Yeah.
It's fun to him.
But I've got to say that starts and ends also with our boss, Phil Griffin. We went to him and we said, listen, this is what we want to do. We want to do a show that, because at the time everybody was saying, the news hole is collapsing. You're going to have less news, more fluff. The interviews are going to be shorter. You're going to try to jam more stories in. And we went to Phil and said, listen, we want to do this show where we're going to have 15-minute interviews. It's going to be non-ideological. It's going to be sort of this safe house for people to come with their ideas. This morning, I'll be honest with you, I love Al. But this morning, Al Sharpton, I disagreed with Al Sharpton, but it was his book. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel the need to shout down Al Sharpton for people in the audience to know I got the best of Al Sharpton. The same thing, I'll have conservatives come on that support Ted Cruz's strategy. And they'll know, even though I disagree with them, even as a conservative Republican, that they can, say what they want to say, and it's a safe place. And that goes back to Phil, who lets us do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Both of you briefly mentioned how a lot of network news is sort of becoming fluffy, especially in the mornings. Your competitors on network, CBS, NBC, all that. How do you think the integration of social media like Twitter and Facebook and talking about what's trending has sort of maybe affected the dissemination of actual hard news for the worse?
For the worse.
I mean, that's just my opinion. You just talked about objectivity. So.
What worries me more about it is the anonymous kind of slinging of mud all over the internet. And, we've seen problems in Washington like we've never seen before, actually, in terms of people not coming together and actually talking. There's social reasons for that. People don't live in Washington anymore and their families don't interconnect. But there's also been this growth in media of polarized shows on the radio, on the internet especially, where it's very extreme on those two mediums. And so you get people who can wake up in the morning and, go to their corner, log on, and stay in their corner all day, driving their car, listening to the radio, and maybe blog or send in some anonymous comments somewhere that are just unbelievably cruel, and then go to bed in their same corner, having heard all day reasons why the other side is evil. And that's new to the past decade or so, and it's, I think, very destructive.
It is destructive. I mean, it's important, though, for for news networks. If they want to use social media, they can use social media to accentuate their reporting, but they shouldn't be
Getting their news there.
getting their nose there and basically chasing their tail in circles.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Hi. Last semester, I was in a class where Steve Burke, CEO of Comcast, came, and he was a guest lecturer.
Oh, he's great. We love him.
Yeah.
Oh, he's amazing,
Oh, I
isn't
love
he?
him.
He
He's
must have
great.
been fantastic.
Did he sign your check
Was it
too?
so
Because
exciting?
he signs ours.
How great was
Yeah.
he?
Oh, he's a beautiful man too, isn't he?
Do you know that he kayaks?
That hair,
No.
it
Around
doesn't.
Manhattan.
That hair, it doesn't move.
He's like Superman.
All right, so I'm sorry. Go ahead. You
I'm
were
sorry.
talking
No,
about our
we
fearless
digress.
leader.
No, I mean, well, it's fine. So, almost lost
I'm
my
sorry.
train of thought.
He
I'm
signs
like
our checks. We
shaking
kind of.
in my boots right now. You have no idea. Okay, so my question was, so Steve Burke, we talked about basically the role that opinion news is playing in our society, and he very frankly said that opinion news sells. It's what's driving the ratings on the cable news channels that are doing really well. And actually, one of my adjunct professors worked at CNN, and he literally said in the room, I don't know what I'd do if I worked at CNN, because they try to, err on the more neutral side. So what I wanted to know from you is, A, why do you think a show like yours, which is known for having a diverse array of opinions and experts, survives on a network like NBC, and how much longer do you think it will last in a news environment where opinion news really does drive the ratings?
So here's the thing, and I'm not going to give advice to Jeff Zucker. I mean, Jeff's a friend of ours. He runs CNN. But if I were going to give advice to Jeff Zucker, I would say embrace it. CNN's brand is news. CNN should be hard news from the second I wake up in the morning until the second I go to bed at night. And if I knew I could turn on any news channel at 8 o'clock at night while after I was, getting my kids ready for bed and I wanted something going on in the background, I'd turn it on. I want hard news. I don't have time to hear people talking about Miley Cyrus. I don't have time to hear people debating whatever the cable news channels are chasing at nighttime. I just don't have time. Listen, I truly believe, and I know because we've been rewarded by Steve Burke, who I don't know if you know this or not, signs our checks. And we make a really good living with hard news. Here's another thing. By doing hard news, we're making, last I heard, 10, 11, 12, 15 times the amount of money for our network than Don Imus made. And we are, Phil Griffin will say publicly, we're, one of the pillars for the network. Now, we're not opinion, that's prime time. But I guess what I'm saying is, if it works from 6 to 9 in the morning, the way it works, and it attracts advertisers in a big, big way, and NBC's making lots and lots and lots of money off of us, that'll work at 8 o'clock on CNN.
So I asked a version of this before, but why have they struggled in the morning? Because it seems like they should have owned the space that you now own.
Who's that, CNN?
Yeah. What?
I don't know. Again, if you're going to do hard news, you've got to sell out for it. You've got to go all the way. And again, I go back to Phil Griffin, who runs the network. Phil said to us, and it was very clarifying, he let us develop the show, but Phil said, hey, only advice I'm going to give you. You got an audience of one. It's Tim Russert. And Tim was still alive at the time, 2007. He said, if Tim watches a segment, I want you to just think, Tim at home. And I knew Tim. And
If you would find it fun or interesting.
and I just sat there, saying, well, what would Tim Russert be wanting to see this morning? And we would do that. And if it veered over into Miley Cyrus, or at the time, Paris Hilton,
Tim better like
it would be it would be a discussion about what this means. And would mean a lot to Mika and myself because, we've got young kids. But yeah, hard news will work. Hard news will sell because there's so little of it out there. I really believe that. There's a reason I keep reading the New York Times. As I told their editor, I buy 2 copies of the Times, one to read and one to take out to my backyard and burn. But I still read the New York Times because I get, and when I'm in Washington, the Washington Post, because that's where I get the news, hard news.
Mika, I interned with your husband. He's a great man, Jim Hoffer at WABC many years
All
ago.
right.
Oh, did you? That's awesome. Thank you.
He's much better to work for
Good
than his
investigative
wife.
reporter.
Right, Lewis? Okay.
Hey.
I'm just joking.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Hi, my name is Carly Marsh. Mika, earlier you spoke to your career path and how us as young women going into the field can kind of work and not, apologize or back into a corner. But I was also interested in how, as young women and, aspiring and intrepid reporters, especially some of us who want to go into broadcasting and hopefully end up in your chair one day, go about kind of balancing starting a new career in broadcasting and a new family, because I know I've seen in a lot of local news outlets, women are sometimes forced to choose and they end up sacrificing their career to raise children and keep a family. Like, how do you balance that without going crazy?
Well,
Mika actually went crazy balancing that.
Yeah.
Didn't you? You really did. It was horrible.
it was tough. I worked a lot of overnight shifts, and I had to learn from some pretty big mistakes. So I will talk about one, because I always found those women who made it, who had their kids, and it'd be a shot of her coming out of the hospital with her baby, and she'll be back on the air looking perfect in 3 weeks. And I always thought, I'll never be like that. It always looks so easy, and it's just not for those women either. And I think we tend to make it look a little too easy in our business, this whole thing. Forget the whole weight issues and the way you're supposed to look, which is a whole nother book. But in terms of starting a family, look, I think you're going to be working when you have kids. That's the new reality. And that reality is going to get better as more and more of us do it. But I also think you have to be very, very firm in your own convictions when it comes to listening to your body and listening to your conscience about what you should do. And that does not mean mommy guilt and feeling really, really sad when you leave the house because your child is crying and clinging to your leg. It's more, where are you supposed to be right now? And I made a big mistake when I had my second child, and I rushed back to work trying to be, make it look easy and be super mom, super wife, super worker, super everything to everybody. And maybe a week in, I was so exhausted, I fell down the stairs holding my baby, and she's only a couple months old, and I broke her leg. So I ended up in the hospital with her, and at one point they even thought her back was broken. So I sat there with that reality hanging over me, and it is a story I tell because I didn't listen to my body, and because sometimes you can't do everything, and sometimes you have to wait. And if you're good, it will happen. If you want it, it will happen. If you're driven, it will happen. It doesn't have to happen right this second. It has to happen soon. That's okay. You can be a little impatient. But you can't be impulsive. And you can't throw caution and everything to the side and just barrel through. This is a long haul. I always figured my career would end at 35 or 40. I'm 46, and I'm going strong. I would have never imagined that. So I tell you, you all will be fine at 35, 40, 45, 50, 55. You will be working, so make your decisions for the long haul. And don't make short-term decisions and end up like I did.
And just so
It's a
you know,
very bad
follow
year.
up on that, Mika always tells young women, and it always shocks them, have your family. Have your family, because guess what? your career may not always be with you. Mika fought hard. She had her family. She gave everything she had to CBS. And on her 39th birthday,
this is like...
when she seemed to be, rising up, and she was on, 60 Minutes, and she was the weekend anchor for CBS Evening News and all these other things, she got fired on her 39th birthday.
This is like embarrassing moments for Mika hour. So I will follow up that story with a story.
So hold on, let me finish. So she got fired on her 39th birthday, and when she was getting fired by the president of CBS News, she looked down and she was actually in her pajamas. And then, I'm making that part up. That was a dream she had. But she did get fired on her 39th birthday.
Okay.
And you know what? She actually had her family to go home to.
I was very proud of that,
because
actually.
the only reason I bring that up is,
First
as
thing
a
I thought of.
man, I see so many women in the business saying, I'll have kids later. I'll have kids later. I'll have kids later. I'll have kids later. And then they get fired at 36 or 37. And they're crying in the newsroom, packing their stuff up.
And we live in the age where our kids want us to be happy, and they want us to fulfill everything that we need to fulfill.
Your kids want you to be happy?
When I
My
got
kids
home,
don't want me to be happy.
When I got home, my little girl, I told them both that I was leaving CBS, and I was trying to come to terms with it, and I would be home with them, and we would be together. And they were like, what? and I remember Carly was kind of quiet, and Amelia, the older one, who's wonderfully selfish.
She's really selfish.
She was 11.
Mika thinks she's a Republican.
Oh, definitely. She loves money. So she's like, you can't do that. You can't do that. That's the only reason the library lady likes me. You can't leave CBS. And then the next day, Carly's teacher called. Carly was 8. And I was like still coming to terms with I was like shell-shocked. And she's like, you need to come here. And I'm like, well, I'm at home. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I am coming right now. And I go to the school, and Carly's kind of sad, and the teacher leans down, and I lean down, and she goes, she told me that you will be leaving CBS, and she's kind of upset. And I was like, oh, God. Honey, but we're going to have so much time together. Why are you crying? And she's like, you can't leave CBS. It makes you so happy. And I was like, oh, now I'm gonna cry. So it ends with, actually, our Christmas card, I'll stop digressing, but our Christmas card that year, after months and months and months and months and months of looking for a job and making dinner for everyone and doing laundry and shrinking everything, was a family picture, and the kids were saying, get her out of here, please hire her.
So,
and I got a job.
We've come to the end of our time. I apologize to those of you who are still in line, but
Joe was just getting started.
I'm just getting started. So anyway, I look at Newt,
Congress,
and I tell him, Newt, you're not going to get away.
What was it that you do? What was it? Coming up next?
Coming up next.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Joe Scarborough. Good to have you on. That's wonderful.
Thank you all for coming. Please join me.
Thank you, guys.
See you tomorrow.
We appreciate it.